That night, the heavens wept, a judgment of cold, relentless rain, a torrent with a cruel intimacy, seeking every seam in her coat to whisper of mortality. Sarah Mitchell, a woman of 63 years, who once mended the broken in trauma wards and was now a fugitive from her own life, pressed her foot down, urging the weary heart of her old Chevy pickup. The Wipers waged a losing battle against the deluge, and the road winding through the Cascade Range had forgotten it was asphalt, dreaming itself a river. She was in flight. In the end, it was as simple and as vast as that. Fleeing a husband whose hands had learned a language of cruelty as his thirst deepened. Escaping a life that had soured somewhere in the long years between the wedding vows and the stolen solace of a morphine drip. 27 years of a shared life dissolved into the storm, and here she was, with no destination, carrying only the weight of a single duffel bag and the clothes that clung to her like a second skin. The truck met a patch of earth turned to treacherous slurry, and the world tilted. She felt that hollow moment of surrender, the sickening waltz when physics reclaims its throne and the sum of your choices becomes meaningless. The wheel became a ghost in her hands. The guardrail appeared like a final, metallic greeter, then vanished. And then there was only air and the terrible, silent scream of understanding that she was falling. Time, in the final moments, becomes a poet. It expands and collapses, holding a lifetime in the space of a breath. Sarah saw her daughter's face, a child of 8, her eyes asking why love could be so angry. She saw her own hands, for the first time, taking what was not hers from a hospital cabinet. She felt the ghost of Tom's grip on her throat from 3 nights ago. The instant she knew the only choice left was between leaving and never breathing again. All of this, suspended in the long, silent drop between the road and the ravine below. The truck struck the water, not with a crash, but as a shattering of worlds. The river's embrace was a cold that promised to still her heart, its depths as black as forgotten memories, rising with a dreadful speed through the floorboards and the fractured window. A sharp, searing pain bloomed in her side, whether from twisted metal or her own bone, she could not tell. Her fingers, raw and bleeding, found no purchase on a door that would not yield. The water filled her mouth, a final, silencing communion, and pulled her down into the great, quiet dark. And then the universe shifted on its axis. A presence bloomed in the crushing dark. It was not a sound, but a change in the very soul of the water, a displacement of pressure and intent. Something of impossible size eclipsed the faint, ghostly light from above. What might have been hands met the contorted steel of the truck's frame and tore through it as if it were mere silver foil. She felt herself being lifted, drawn from the tomb of the wreck, and pulled upward through a current that fought to claim her for its own. The air met her face like a benediction. She was being carried, cradled against something that smelled of damp earth and ancient pine, and a scent older than any name she knew. Gently, she was laid upon a great, flat stone. The rain had softened its fury, now falling as a tender mist. Behind her, the truck gave a final, metallic sigh and sank deeper into the river's heart, its leaking gasoline painting poisonous, fleeting rainbows upon the water's surface. She fought to bring the world into focus, but it remained a spinning, broken kaleidoscope. Her ribs felt as though they'd been played like a xylophone with a heavy mallet. When at last she found the strength to turn her head, her savior had already receded into the gloaming. It was but a shadow flowing through other shadows, dissolving into the deep woods as effortlessly as smoke into the evening air. Sarah drifted into unconsciousness, a river's lullaby in her ears, and the phantom weight of an unseen gaze upon her soul. Now, before we journey deeper into what followed, and I promise you, the path ahead will challenge the very foundations of what you believe exists in the wild, secret places of the world, I invite you to join our circle. Please, touch that subscribe button. This channel is a sanctuary for true stories that echo in the soul, the kind that leave you at 3 in the morning wondering about the whispers on the wind. And after you walk with Sarah Mitchell through her ordeal in those mountains, you will want to remain, because this story, it doesn't just tell you something, it changes you. When Sarah returned to the world, the first miracle was the warmth. The second was the quiet, astonishing fact of her own breath. The third was the fire. It had been built with intention, a careful prayer of creation. Wet branches, which had no right to burn, were coaxed into a cone of steady flame. Pale spirals of smoke ascended to the heavens, and the heat graced her skin like a gentle, reassuring hand. She lay upon stone, worn smooth by the patient caress of forgotten ages, placed with such care that the fire's gift of warmth reached her, while its smoke was carried away. Her ankle had been tended to, not with the sterile precision of gauze and tape, but with what looked to be a strip of her own rain-torn jacket, bound with a firm and knowledgeable touch. A gourd rested beside her, still radiating a faint heat, filled with water that tasted of life itself, of river stone and pine, and the clean promise of morning. A profound stillness held the forest around her, yet it was not the quiet of emptiness, but the quiet of presence. A watchful silence that pressed softly on the ears, a silence that let you know you were a guest in a cathedral that belonged to something far older than yourself. Sarah pushed herself to a sitting position, each movement a slow, careful negotiation with the chorus of pain in her body. Her ribs were a tapestry of deep bruises, perhaps even cracked. The cuts on her arms had ceased their weeping, already beginning the patient work of healing. Her head throbbed with the memory of a violent drum solo, and yet nothing felt truly broken. Whoever or whatever had drawn her from the river had done so with an impossible tenderness. The fire crackled, a log surrendering to the flame, and then, from the deep, velvet darkness beyond the firelight's edge, another sound arose. A soft tap, a breath of silence. Then two more. Tap, tap. It wasn't the sound of wood on wood, but something denser, more resonant, like stone, gently striking stone. It was a rhythm of pure intention. It held no menace, only existence. A quiet declaration, perhaps a question. Asterisk, I am here. Do you still breathe? Asterisk. Something of that sacred nature. Sarah's throat was a desert, her voice a prisoner of thirst and shock. With trembling hands, she reached for the gourd and drank. The water a cool, perfect absolution that tasted of survival. She set the vessel down, her fingers closing around a small, smooth stone. She tapped it twice against the great rock upon which she, Saturday, tap, tap. A silence followed that felt as if the entire forest, from the smallest moss to the oldest fir, was holding its breath. And then, from the darkness, came the echo of her own hope. Two soft taps in return. She sat for a measureless time after that, her gaze lost in the shifting heart of the fire, trying to piece together the fragments of her shattered reality. The truck, her last tie to the world she knew, was a memory at the bottom of a river. Her phone, a lifeline to nowhere, was gone with it. She was adrift in an ocean of trees, with no map, no compass, no sense of which direction held the cold comfort of civilization. And yet, she had not been abandoned. Something had saved her, built her a fire, given her water, tended her wounds. Something that did not wish to be seen, perhaps because its nature was too vast for human eyes. The body's cruel memory of morphine found her near the dawn. She had been free for 3 weeks, 3 agonizing weeks of trembling hands and feverish sweats, of nights where her very bones seemed to ache with a desire to flee her skin. 3 weeks since she had decided that a slow death by degrees was a far worse fate than whatever Tom might inflict. 3 weeks of willing herself through shifts at the clinic, stealing moments to be sick in private, only to return to a home where her husband no longer saw her, unless he needed a place to aim his rage. Now, the familiar agony returned with a vengeance, her stomach clenched into a hard knot, waves of sickness washed over her. She curled herself into a small, tight ball on the stone, her teeth gritted against the storm inside, and simply endured. The fire had dwindled to a bed of glowing embers. The sun was beginning its slow ascent behind a veil of clouds, turning the mist from a deep charcoal to a soft, forgiving gray. When she could finally uncurl her body, she discovered the gourd had been refilled, its warmth a silent offering. Beside it lay a bundle of broad, green leaves, cradling a dark paste that smelled of bitter herbs and the deep earth. She had no name for it, but the old instincts of a nurse, a healer, stirred within her. She brought a small amount to her nose. Willow bark, she thought, and something else, wild and unknown. Trusting a wisdom deeper than her own, she spread the balm over the cuts on her arms. It stung with a clean fire, and then a blessed numbness bloomed. From the shelter of the trees, the sound of shifting branches reached her. It was not the sigh of the wind. It was too deliberate, too mindful. Something was moving in a slow, parallel path to where she sat, maintaining its distance, cloaked in shadow, watching over her. Sarah drew on a reserve of strength she didn't know she possessed and pushed herself to her feet, a wince escaping her as her ankle protested. She limped toward the edge of the small clearing, her path guided by the gentle murmur of the creek flowing upstream. Every single step was a testament of will. Every breath was a sharp reminder of the body's fragility. But she had weathered worse storms. She had survived the slow erosion of love into fear. She had survived the siren call of addiction. She had survived the long, silent nights after her daughter's voice had faded from her life. She would survive this. The impressions left in the soft mud at the water's edge made her heart stand still. They were impressions not of man, but of something far older. Impossibly broad, impossibly profound, yet shaped like feet, if feet could be of such a scale, with toes that left hollows like giant fingers pressed into the softest clay. The tracks traced a path parallel to the creek, venturing upstream before doubling back, weaving a silent story around the place where she had slept, approaching the fire from 3 different sides, yet never breaching its circle of light. It was as if a great and thoughtful being had paced the darkness, weighing a decision of immense consequence. She knelt, the damp earth cool against her knees, and pressed her hand into the hollow of one of the prints. Against its vastness, her own palm seemed as delicate and small as a child's. The being that had pulled her from the twisted metal of that truck was a creature of impossible contrasts. A force mighty enough to tear steel, as if it were paper, yet tender enough to cradle an ankle without shattering the bone within. Sarah rose, her gaze sweeping into the cathedral of trees. The morning mist was surrendering its hold, allowing columns of golden light to pierce the canopy. And there, veiled in the deep shadows between the light, a figure moved. It was tall, impossibly so, a silhouette cloaked in dark fur that seemed to absorb the very light around it. It stood perfectly still, observing her with eyes that caught the nascent sun and reflected it back as twin flames of amber intelligence. A tide of terror should have consumed her. Every primal instinct should have been a siren, screaming for her to run, but she had spent 27 years held captive by the fear of a man who had sworn to love her. She had endured 3 weeks, terrified of her own body's rebellion. Fear was no stranger. It was an old and weary companion, and she had long ago learned how to sit with it in silence. She lifted a hand, not as a wave, but as a quiet testament, a gesture of profound acknowledgement. Asterisk, I see you, and I am grateful. Asterisk. The figure in the deep woods inclined its great head, a gesture of ancient curiosity. Then, with a slowness that felt deliberate and sacred, it raised a massive hand in return. The motion was so nearly human, yet worlds apart. Then, turning, it dissolved back into the tapestry of the forest, as if it had been nothing more than a shadow woven from the trees themselves. Long after the forest had reclaimed its secret, Sarah remained, her hands still suspended in the cool morning air, her mind a whirlwind, trying to reconcile the myths told around campfires with the gentle savior who had spared her life, trying to fathom what in God's name she was meant to do now. The answer arrived not in a voice, but as another percussive whisper from the trees. 3 distinct taps, measured and clear. A pause hung in the air. She found a stone, its weight a comfort in her palm, and tapped back 3 times. And in that simple, resonant exchange, a dialogue was born. A language woven from stone and silence, understood only by the 2 souls who shared it. The next 2 days unfolded in a rhythm she could not name but learned to feel in her bones. The creature, for she had no other word for it, and could not bring herself to utter. The one whispered in folklore remained a felt presence, a guardian just beyond the veil of sight. Each morning and evening, she would find the gourd mysteriously refilled. The fire held its embers, tended by an unseen hand. Small offerings would appear at the edge of her clearing, wild berries wrapped in broad leaves, roots that tasted of the deep earth and quieted the gnawing hunger within her, and once a fish, perfectly cleaned and laid upon a sun-warmed rock. She sent her missives upon the stone, and the forest would answer in kind. They built a lexicon that required no translation. A single tap became an affirmation. Asterisk, yes, I am here, all is well. Asterisk, 2 taps, a gentle warning. Asterisk, no, be still, danger is near. Asterisk, and 3, the most precious of all. Asterisk, thank you, I see you, there is peace between us. Asterisk, her body began to mend. The sprain in her ankle eased. The cuts on her skin faded into faint, silvery lines. The tremors of withdrawal lessened, though some nights she still awoke, shaking, phantom cravings slithering through her veins like insidious insects. On those nights, she would hear a subtle stirring in the darkness beyond the firelight. Not an approach, but a presence, a silent, watchful vigil. On the dawn of the 3rd day, she discovered a gift that stole the very breath from her lungs. It was the button from her jacket, the one she had carved from wood herself in better, more hopeful days, her initials etched into its surface SM for Sarah Mitchell. From a time when she still believed in the promise of a future, it lay there on the stone beside her, meticulously cleaned of mud, placed where the morning light would find it first. Something had returned to the mangled tomb of her past, had descended into that cold, black water. It had retrieved this one small, forgotten piece of her and carried it back. Sarah's fingers closed around the button, its familiar familiar wooden warmth a balm to her soul. She looked toward the silent trees, seeing only the play of shadows and light, but she knew it was there. Listening, "Thank you," she whispered. Her voice, a fragile thing, rusted from disuse, yet it carried through the vast, quiet sanctuary of the forest. "For everything. Thank you." A stillness held the air for a moment, and then, from the deep green heart of the woods, came the reply. 3 soft taps. Asterisk, an acknowledgement. "You are welcome. We are safe." Asterisk. She realized then that tears were tracing paths down her cheeks, but they were not born of sorrow. It was something else entirely. Perhaps it was the shattering release of a relief so profound it had no name, the breaking open of a heart that had been locked away for far too long. When was the last time someone had offered her a kindness with no expectation of return? When was the last time she had truly felt safe? The ancient forest seemed to breathe with her, its patience a living thing, its heart full of secrets. And for the first time in years, perhaps in the entire tapestry of her life, Sarah Mitchell felt she was precisely and perfectly where she was meant to be. Yet such tranquility is a fragile gift, a fleeting season that, by its very nature, cannot last. The helicopter arrived on the 4th day, its sound tearing through the morning quiet like a chainsaw through silk. Sarah heard it long before she saw it, that relentless, percussive times, whop, whop, whop times of rotors beating the air into submission. Lifting her gaze, she caught flashes of white and orange through the canopy. Search and rescue. Which meant they had found the truck, which meant the world of men was looking for her. Before the machine could draw near, her guardian vanished. One moment, she felt its focused attention, a specific gravity in the trees. The next, an absolute void, as if it had been nothing more than a fading dream. The helicopter made 2 wide circles, its shadow passing over her like a fleeting cloud before continuing its journey. And still, Sarah remained rooted to the earth. She should have raised her arms, cried out, made some sign to the sky that she was alive, but her hands remained at her sides, her lips remained sealed. Something fundamental within her had shifted during these 4 days. The very arithmetic of her soul had changed. Out here, she was not Tom's broken wife. She was not the nurse haunted by the ghosts of her own failings. She was not the mother from whom a daughter had turned away. Out here, she was simply Sarah, and a being that should have been the embodiment of terror had shown her a depth of care she had not known from any human in years. The sound of the helicopter faded into memory, but she knew its absence was only a reprieve. The world she had left would not so easily forget her, which meant a choice had to be made about what would come next. That evening, the fire danced with a particular fervor, its flames casting long shadows as she sat wrapped in the tattered remnants of her old life, contemplating the crossroads before her. She could follow the water downstream to the road and flag down the first sign of help, return to that other world, face the barrage of questions, the pitying looks, the life she had fled, go home except it was never a home, only a house, and inside it was a man who had taught her that love was just another word people use before they inflict pain. Or she could choose this earth, this silence. To learn the quiet language of survival from the one being who seemed to understand how to live hidden from a world that so often shatters what it touches. The tap, when it came, was not from the distant trees, but from the very edge of the firelight behind her. So close, it was like a breath upon her neck. She did not turn, did not dare to break the spell. She simply waited. Another tap, a punctuation to the night's quiet question. Then, the soft sound of an offering being placed upon the ground, followed by footsteps, immense yet impossibly gentle, retreating into the deep embrace of the brush until there was only the crackle of the fire and a profound, waiting silence. Sarah turned, a slow, deliberate pivot, as if the air itself had grown heavy with reverence. There, resting upon the stone behind her, sat a small, carved effigy, born of wood and will. Its form was rough-hewn, yet every line spoke of intention, shaped by what could only be tools of stone. It depicted a woman huddled by the warmth of a fire, and beside her, a whisper of a form, barely suggested but as undeniable as the stars, a larger figure watched from the shelter of the trees. She lifted the figure, her thumb tracing the contours of the wood, polished smooth by a creator's care. A sudden, sharp warmth bloomed behind her eyes. This being, this creature the world had branded a monster, had given her a piece of its soul in the form of art. It had captured in silent wood the very words her heart had been unable to speak. You are not forsaken. I see your spirit. This moment, this life, it matters. With a tenderness reserved for the most sacred of things, she set the carving down and reached for her tapping stone. 3 distinct beats, a breath of silence, 3 beats more, a rhythm of gratitude sent out into the night. Thank you. I see you, too. And from the deep, velvet darkness, an answering pulse echoed back. Then, something more. A stirring in the shadowed tapestries at the fire's edge. The creature stepped into the light, just far enough for its true form to be revealed to her for the very first time. It was a towering silhouette of some 8 feet, cloaked in dark brown fur that held a softness that defied its wildness. Its frame was sculpted with a power that no human could possess, a strength that made her understand how legends are born from truth. But its face? Oh, its face. It was a map drawn between worlds, neither animal nor man. It was something other, something singular. And its eyes held entire universes of intelligence, of ancient sorrow, and a profound loneliness that resonated with her own. And then, a truth that stole the very air from her lungs. It was not alone. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. A smaller figure, perhaps 4 feet in height, pressed close to the larger one's leg, its fur a lighter shade, the color of sand after a gentle rain. Its eyes were immense, twin orbs of liquid amber fixed upon her with a curiosity as pure and bright as the firelight. The Great One, and she thought of it as a hymn now, a feeling that settled deep in her soul, rested a massive, gentle hand on the child's shoulder. A gesture of protection, of tenderness, a gesture so profoundly, achingly human that it made her own heart clench. The 3 of them stood there, a silent trinity bathed in the flickering glow, bound by a current of understanding that flowed deeper than any spoken word. The child, emboldened, took a tentative step forward. The Great One allowed it, his hand drifting from shoulder to back, a silent promise of safety. But Sarah remained perfectly still, her own hands open and visible, an offering of peace. The little one drew nearer, halting at the very precipice of the light. It bent, its small hand closing around a stone. It glanced back at its parent, who offered a slow, deliberate nod, a real nod, so startlingly familiar it sent a tremor through her soul. And then, the child tapped the stone 3 times against a weathered rock. A smile bloomed on Sarah's face, unbidden and pure. She found her own stone, its familiar weight, a comfort in her palm, and tapped back in perfect reply. 3 beats. Hello, I see you. We are safe together. The child's face seemed to split into an expression of sheer delight. It tapped again, a faster, more exuberant rhythm, a whole symphony of joyful conversation. The Great One emitted a low rumble from deep within its chest, not a threat, but a sound so akin to a human chuckle it warmed her to the bone. Then he receded into the shadows, the child following close behind. But they did not leave. She could feel their presence, a silent, watchful vigil in the heart of the wilderness. And for the first time since the long-lost days of her girlhood, Sarah Mitchell felt utterly and completely protected. The dawn arrived not with birdsong, but with the discordant sound of men's voices breaking the morning's peace. She awoke to their rough, distant calls carried on the wind, a search party perhaps half a mile downstream. She could hear them calling her name, their progress, a scar upon the quiet, crashing through the undergrowth with the subtlety of a falling boulder. The entire forest had gone silent around their intrusion. The animals had retreated. The birds had hushed their songs. Even the creek seemed to whisper its flow. Sarah rose, her ankle sending a sharp complaint but holding her weight. The logic of the world she had left behind called to her. She should go to them. These were good people, after all, volunteers from town giving up their day to search for a woman they believed was lost, or worse. She should walk toward the sound, raise a hand, and let them know she was alive. But her protectors were also out there. She could not see them, but she felt their presence, a singular, focused attention that was a palpable weight in the air. If the searchers came any closer, if they found this hallowed clearing, they would see the remnants of the fire, the impossible tracks. They would find evidence of a truth the world was not prepared to embrace, and then the desecration would begin. Hunters, scientists, the glaring eye of the media. This sanctuary would be flooded with those determined to capture and categorize, and these beings who had offered her nothing but grace would be hunted. The sound of her old world was drawing nearer, threatening to shatter this new one. In that moment, Sarah made a choice. She moved with a sudden, fierce purpose, scattering the fire's remains, burying the embers under dirt and stone until only cold ash remained. The small, carved figure found a home in her pocket, a secret talisman. With a fallen branch, she swept the ground, erasing the footprints, hers and theirs, a desperate attempt to wipe clean the sacred history of the night. It was a novice's work, but perhaps these were ordinary men, not trackers. Perhaps they were just fathers and husbands doing their duty. She moved upstream, her limp a steady rhythm against the pull of the current, fleeing the voices. And behind her, she heard the deliberate snap of branches. Not the searchers. It was something else, a guardian presence moving parallel to her path, steering her away from the well-intentioned blindness of mankind. The creek narrowed, transforming into a series of delicate waterfalls that cascaded over stone cloaked in moss. Sarah climbed, her hands finding purchase, her feet seeking solid ground on the slick rock. Below her, the voices of men faded into a distant memory, and the deep, green silence of the wild embraced her once more. She reached a high plateau and paused, her lungs burning, her ribs a constellation of aches. And there, emerging from the cathedral of ancient trees that stood before her, was her guide. Their eyes met across the space. In the unfiltered light of day, she saw not a creature, but a being. She saw the grace in its careful, deliberate movements. She saw the profound intelligence shining in its eyes. She saw the network of scars across its arms and chest, a testament to a life of hardship and survival. This was no mindless beast from a nightmare. This was a person. Different, yes, in a way that defied all words, but a person nonetheless. It raised one great hand, gesturing further upstream. The meaning was as clear as the mountain air. Come, this path leads to sanctuary. And without a moment's hesitation, Sarah followed. They walked for what felt like an eternity, a pilgrimage into the heart of the untamed world. Her guide moved through the forest like water, finding its way through stone, a current of effortless, silent grace, leaving behind almost no trace of his passage. The child was a flicker of joyous energy, appearing and disappearing among the trees, swinging from branches with a fluid ease that made Sarah's own weary joints ache in sympathy. And from time to time, the forest's own secret heartbeat would sound a percussive dialogue tapped out on hollow logs, a language she could feel but not yet comprehend. They climbed ever higher into the mountains, leaving behind the last vestiges of roads and trails of anything touched by man. A part of her, the logical part, whispered that she should be terrified, following a myth deeper into a wilderness that could swallow her whole. But another part, the resilient core of her, forged in the fires of Tom's cruelty and her own long battles. The part that had refused to break that part knew a deeper truth. Out here, in this sacred quiet, she was safer than she had been in decades. As dusk began to paint the sky in hues of lavender and rose, they stopped in a clearing that was a secret held by the mountain itself. Shielded by towering rock formations and a thick embrace of ancient growth, it was a place invisible to any who did not already know its heart. The great being gestured toward a hollow beneath a stone, overhang a promise of shelter, dry and protected from the coming night's wind. Then, he moved away to begin the timeless ritual of gathering wood. Sarah watched as he coaxed a flame into being, not with clumsy force, but with the patient artistry of one who had performed this rite 1,000 times. He used dried moss for tinder, arranged the kindling into a perfect, breathable structure, and struck sparks from 2 pieces of flint until a fledgling flame took hold and grew. The entire process, a masterpiece of practiced efficiency, took the space of a mere 5 minutes. This was the work of someone who understood the soul of fire, who lived in harmony with the world. The child approached her, a shy emissary from the wild. It set a small offering of berries at her feet before scurrying back to the safety of its parent's side, peering out with wide, curious eyes. Sarah smiled, a genuine warmth spreading through her chest. She picked up a single berry and ate it. Its taste was a burst of sweet and tart, a gift from the earth. She nodded her gratitude and, with her palm flat against the ground, tapped 3 times. Thank you. The small face lit up with a joy that needed no translation, a beam of pure, unadulterated delight. That night, bathed in the fire's gentle glow as the mythic beings found their rest nearby, Sarah's thoughts drifted to the daughter she had lost. Emma, a woman of 31 now, a lifetime away. Perhaps a wife, she mused. Maybe even a mother herself? A silence of 4 years stretched between them, a chasm carved the day Emma had arrived at her door, her eyes finding the hidden bruises, her voice a desperate plea for Sarah to escape. But Sarah, in her fear, had woven a tapestry of excuses, choosing the hell she knew over the terrifying void of solitude. Emma's departure had been a storm of tears, followed by a silence that echoed louder than any argument, and in the quiet chambers of her heart, Sarah held no blame. For what child could bear witness to her own mother's slow, chosen descent into oblivion? Yet, she had not perished. She had endured. And now, here she sat, a solitary figure in a vast wilderness, sharing the earth with creatures of lore and feeling a pulse of life thrum through her veins she hadn't felt in an age. The siren call of the morphine had been silenced, cauterized by the raw demands of survival. Her physical form was mending, but a more profound restoration was underway. A healing of the soul, a quiet knitting together of a spirit she hadn't known was so profoundly fractured. She drew the small, carved effigy from her pocket, its form dancing in the flickering firelight. The woman beside the flames, the guardian in the shadowed woods. Two souls from different worlds, who by all rights should have been adversaries or phantoms to one another, now bound by the simplest and most sacred of threads, kindness, a quiet reverence, and the shared revelation that to survive did not mean one had to be alone. The great being was observing her. She could feel the weight of its gaze, and when she looked up, she met those luminous amber eyes across the hearth of their shared fire. For a long, suspended moment, they simply held each other's stare, a silent conversation passing between them. Then, with a deliberate grace, it reached for a piece of wood, and, with a shard of stone, began to carve. Its movements slow and methodical, birthing a new shape from the raw material of the forest. Sarah drew her jacket closer around her, a faint, genuine smile gracing her lips. Whatever the future held, the long season of running toward the storm was over. It was time, at last, to run toward the light. The weeks that followed unfolded into a gentle, unspoken rhythm. Her new companions became her guides, teaching her the forest's secrets, the hidden springs, the nourishing plants, the subtle language of the shifting light and wind. The little one, a spirit of pure courage, was a constant bearer of gifts. Smooth, river-worn stones, leaves of intricate design, and once, a translucent, shed snakeskin that drew a startled yelp from her before she could contain it. The Great One had made that low, rumbling chuckle again, and for all the world, it felt like the warm, easy laughter of a dear friend. She began to understand the percussive cadence of their language, a tapestry of taps and knocks against the ancient trees. Together, they expanded it, weaving gestures and rhythms into a dialect capable of conveying a universe of thought. The Great One was a patient tutor, repeating the patterns with tireless grace until her hands found the correct beat. And in this sacred exchange, she gave back in kind, sharing the wisdom of her 30 years as a nurse, showing it how to set a fractured branch, how to cleanse a wound with nature's own remedies. They were the most unlikely of families, nestled there in the heart of the mountains. A small constellation of broken souls, each one learning, in the company of the other, how to become whole again. But the world, with its long and restless arms, has a way of reaching for you, even in the places you have gone to be forgotten. And so it was, in the heart of September, that the sound of men and machines arrived. Sarah felt the intrusion before she saw it, a distant, metallic scream of chainsaws that tore through the tranquility, followed by the cracking thunder of falling giants. It was the sound of pure violence, a mechanical, merciless heartbeat against the forest's soul. The Great One heard it as well. It stood at the precipice of their haven, head cocked, a statue of profound attention. When its gaze finally met hers, she saw an emotion that had, until that moment, been a stranger to its amber eyes. It was fear. And in that instant, she understood everything. This was not merely a home. It was a sanctuary, the last bastion where they could simply be, free from the prying eyes of a world that would hunt them, dissect them, and parade them as proof for its own insatiable appetite. To be driven from this place was to be cast into the open, to face the terrible calculus of exposure and risk. It meant the little one, so precious and vulnerable, might be discovered. With each passing day of the following week, the drone of the chainsaws grew louder, a creeping tide of destruction. The forest began to wear the scars of this invasion. Once hidden paths were now violated with the bright, alien lines of surveyor's tape. The symphony of the wild grew muted as its creatures fled the cacophony. Sarah watched the Great One, saw the tension coil in its powerful frame, its movements becoming a study in vigilance as it constantly positioned its body, a living shield between the child and the encroaching sound. A quiet resolve settled over her. "I must go down there," she conveyed one morning, her voice a low and steady murmur. Their shared language had grown to a point where the intent behind her words was as clear as the words themselves. "I have to see the scope of their work. Perhaps there is something I can do," it answered with a slow, deliberate shake of its head, the meaning unmistakable. "Danger. Stay here." "I know," she whispered, her hand rising as if to soothe its silent protest. "But I am one of them, a human. They will see me and see nothing to fear, and from them, I might learn what we need to know. I can discover how far their reach is meant to extend." The great being held her in its gaze for a long, silent eternity. Then, it raised one enormous hand and placed it upon her shoulder with a touch so impossibly gentle, so exquisitely careful, it felt like a benediction. The gesture spoke volumes that no language could ever contain. "Be safe. Return to us. I will, she vowed, her voice thick with the weight of that promise. The camp was a raw wound carved into what had once been a sacred grove of ancient cedars. It was a landscape of desecration, stumps standing like a field of tombstones, the earth churned into a primordial soup by the tracks of heavy machinery, the very air choked with the fumes of diesel and the ghosts of fallen trees. Amidst the chaos, men in hard hats and fluorescent vests moved with purpose. Sarah counted nearly 20 of them. This was no small endeavor, but an industrial assault. She walked into the heart of the devastation as if she had every right to be there, her stride imbued with a quiet confidence. No one paid any mind to a woman in her 60s. With a crown of silver hair and a slight limp, she wore the invisible armor of someone's mother, of someone utterly harmless. "Can I help you?" a man called out, striding toward her with a clipboard in his grasp. His face was a roadmap of seasons spent in the sun and wind, a foreman's face. His name tag, pinned to his vest, read Miller. "Just passing through on a hike," Sarah replied, her tone easy and unconcerned. "I was just curious how far up this beautiful mountain you all are planning to clear." Miller's eyes narrowed slightly, studying her for a moment. "You're a long way up for a simple day hike." "I'm fond of the quiet," she offered, a statement that was, in its essence, the purest truth. It seemed to be enough for him. The suspicion in his eyes softened. "We've got the clearance to push another 2 miles north and a quarter mile out on each side of this access road." He gestured with his chin toward a muddy scar in the earth that Sarah hadn't even registered as a road. "All permitted and proper. We should be wrapped up here by November." 2 miles. The words landed like stones in her heart. That would place their machines directly upon the sacred clearing, the very heart of her new friend's world. "And the wildlife?" Sarah asked, forcing a note of casual curiosity into her voice, a stark contrast to the storm raging within her. This must be disrupting a great deal of their natural habitat. A weary resignation settled on Miller's shoulders as he shrugged. "That's a question for the suits, not me. I'm just the hand that holds the saw." Yet, a shadow of disquiet flickered in his gaze, a silent confession that his heart wasn't in the work. And in that flicker, she saw a glimmer of hope, a common ground to stand upon. Sarah offered a quiet nod, her body beginning to pivot away before a thought arrested her movement. She paused, her voice soft but clear. "Would you be willing to tell me who holds the purse strings for this entire operation?" "A private outfit," he murmured, the words tasting like ash. "Some development firm out of Seattle, dreaming of a resort by Crescent Lake. They see timber and roads where we see a forest." He drew a cigarette, its tip glowing like a dying ember. "Between us, it's a profound shame. Some of these cedars have watched 300 years of seasons turn, but the whisper of coin is louder than the wisdom of ages, isn't it?" The whisper of coin, yes. It was a language the world always seemed to understand, a siren's song that drowned out all else. With a quiet word of thanks, Sarah departed, her mind a whirlwind of grim calculations. A resort was not a scar, but a permanent wound upon the land, a future of roads, buildings, and the ceaseless tide of humanity. It meant the sanctuary was breached, forcing the creatures from the only home they knew. And a question echoed in her soul: where could they possibly flee? How far could they journey before the world ran out of wild places? The great being stood waiting upon her return, a silent, ancient sentinel. It gazed upon her, and in its profound eyes, she saw the reflection of her own sorrow. No words were needed. The story was written on her face, and it had been read with perfect, heartbreaking clarity. That night, beneath a canopy of whispering leaves, Sarah's thoughts drifted back to Tom, to the hollow echoes of the house she'd fled, to a life that felt like a borrowed, ill-fitting garment. For years, she had been a prisoner in a cage of her own making, whispering to herself that the door was locked when, all along, the choice to leave had been resting in her own trembling hand, waiting for the courage to turn the key. And now, here she was, a denizen of the deep woods, a confidante to cryptids, standing against the relentless march of so-called progress. And for the first time since she could remember, a profound sense of purpose bloomed in her chest, a feeling that her life, at last, held weight and meaning. The ghost of the morphine had faded. The shadow of Tom had receded. The chains of fear had fallen away. And in the quiet space they left behind, a single, unshakable thing remained: purpose. And this newfound purpose, she was beginning to understand, was not a gentle guide, but a wild thing with teeth and claws. Over the ensuing days, a strategy began to crystallize, born of desperation and resolve. Sarah knew she could not halt the storm, a lone woman against a tide of money and machines, but she could be a stone in the river, diverting the current, slowing its relentless pace. She could buy them time, and time was the most precious currency they had. She became a ghost of the tree line, visiting the camp at unpredictable hours, a specter bearing gifts. She wove herself into the fabric of their days, building a fragile trust with Miller and his crew. She brought them coffee brewed over the creature's fire, a secret irony that brought a deep, rumbling sound, surely a form of laughter from the great being. She learned the names of their children, listened to the litanies of their grievances, and became a quiet repository for their weary sighs. By her third visit, the frost around Miller had thawed. He spoke of his grandson, of the forest that had been his life's work since he was just 18, his voice laced with a quiet sorrow for how the world had changed. "It's all corporate now," he confessed, his words a lament. "There was a time we took pride in the craft, in a sustainable harvest. Now, it's just a scorched earth campaign for the highest bidder. But a strangeness has crept into these woods," he confided one afternoon, the two of them sharing her coffee on the throne of a felled giant. "Our equipment fails without reason. The GPS signals dance and lie. And yesterday, I swear on my life, someone spirited away every single one of our surveyor stakes. Cost us 2 full days of work." Sarah held her expression as still as a forest pool, a perfect mask of innocent curiosity. "Vandals, you think?" "Perhaps," he conceded, though his eyes said otherwise. "But it would take a soul of immense audacity to waltz into an active site and play games with our livelihood. No one's seen a soul." He took a long, thoughtful sip. "It has the men spooked. They're whispering about the old stories this mountain keeps." A faint smile touched her lips as she offered the name, her tone light as a falling leaf. "You mean Bigfoot?" The humor did not land. Miller's face remained etched with gravity. "Yeah, that," he said, the word heavy with unspoken belief. He paused, searching for the right confession. "I've walked these woods for 35 years. I know their rhythms, their moods, their secrets. And this, what's happening now, this is not the forest I know." She tucked his words away, a precious and potent piece of her arsenal. Fear, she mused, was a powerful tool. Fear bred caution. And caution, in time, could blossom into a healthy respect for that which is not understood. And so the quiet war of nerves continued. Nothing to bring harm, a promise she had extracted from the great being. Just a campaign of relentless, unnerving disruption. Surveyor stakes replanted in nonsensical patterns, fuel siphoned from resting machines, chainsaws found with their chains loosened just enough to render them useless, but not to cause a man to lose a limb. The work slowed to a crawl, and the men began to cast wary glances into the deep, watchful shadows of the woods. And then, the veil of invisibility was torn. The story reached her 3 days later, a wildfire of rumor and fear. A young logger, Travis, had been working the northern fringe as twilight bled across the sky. He swore he saw a colossal silhouette detaching itself from the tree line, a mere 30 feet from where he stood. It was upright, cloaked in shadow and fur, its gaze fixed upon him. He shouted, and the apparition dissolved back into the forest. But the image was burned into his mind, a being easily 8 feet tall, with eyes that held the wild, ancient light of a wolf. Half the crew dismissed his tale as the ravings of a drunk or a liar. The other half fell into a stony silence, the kind men adopt when a primal fear takes root in their hearts. Miller, ever the pragmatist, pulled the entire operation back 50 yards. A safety precaution, he called it. But no one in that quiet, unsettled camp dared to argue. That evening, Sarah returned to a sanctuary filled not with peace, but with a palpable distress. The Great One paced, a caged storm of anxiety, its low sounds filled with a new and urgent note. The little one clung to its parent's leg, its own small heart trembling in response. Sarah understood in an instant. To be seen was to be hunted. Attention was a spotlight that could only end in ruin. "All is well," she communicated, her fingers tapping out the rhythmic language of the forest against the bark of a tree. "We are safe. They are blind to the truth. They do not know." But the great head moved from side to side, a slow, solemn negation of her hope. The message was clear, a tolling bell in the quiet of her soul. Danger is here. The time of our leaving is upon us. A cold fist clenched around her heart. She had always known this was a fleeting season, a borrowed peace. But somehow, in the quiet passage of days, the temporary had woven itself into the fabric of forever, and this wild, hidden place had become the only true home her heart had ever known. Sleep was a distant shore she could not reach that night. She lay in her shelter, listening to the deep, slow respiration of the forest, her mind caught in the cross-currents of choice and consequence. The saws would not be silenced forever. The clearing would one day fall. The creatures would be forced to vanish into myth once more. And she, what would become of Sarah? Would she return to the world of men? To face the barrage of questions, the skeptical glances, the life she had so desperately clawed her way out of? Would she fall back into that suffocating spiral of pain and poison that had almost claimed her very soul? Or could she choose this? To remain wild, to remain free, to remain with the ancient souls who had not only saved her body, but had taught her spirit how to be still, how to finally live at peace within her own skin. One might have expected the choice to be a crucible of the heart, a moment of profound and agonizing doubt, but it was not. The dawn arrived not on wings of light, but carried on the foul breath of smoke. It was not the honest scent of a cook fire, nor the clean, purposeful burn of a tended flame. This was a violation, a bitter, chemical stain upon the air, overwhelming in its presence. Sarah emerged from her sanctuary, her steps faltering, to witness a sky to the south bled of its color, now a shroud of somber gray. The great creature was already awake, a silent sentinel at the forest's edge, its gaze fixed upon the rising plume of desecration. The two words settled in her soul like ash, a forest fire. She knew this land's cyclical heartbreaks. The Cascades wept with fire nearly every year, born of sun-scorched summers, the jagged fury of lightning, or the simple, thoughtless hand of humanity. Yet, this was but early September, and the memory of rain, a mere 2 days past, was still fresh upon the earth. The woods were not a brittle, waiting pyre. This was a season of life, not of this ravenous, unnatural blaze, unless a human hand had willed it into being. Then the breeze turned, a fickle messenger bearing a truth far fouler than the smoke alone. Beneath the scent of burning pine, a profane trinity whispered its name. Gasoline, diesel, the unholy perfume of an accelerant. A silent prayer of disbelief escaped her lips. The logging company. They had set this world ablaze, a scorched earth offering to their own avarice. No doubt they would weave a tale of a saboteur to hide their sin, a convenient lie to mask the truth of land cleared with haste and greed. It was an act as illegal as it was damned, yet who, in this vast and silent wilderness, would ever bear witness to their crime? But the great creature knew. Sarah saw the truth etched in the sudden, hard line of its shoulders, heard it in the low, keening sound that was the very voice of grief. This was its sanctuary, its domain, the sacred ground where it had sought to nurture its young in peace. And now, the race of man was turning it to cinders, for the simple, terrible reason that fire was easier than the patient labor of an axe. By the time twilight fell, the inferno would be upon them. Their time was measured not in days, but in the fleeting passage of a few precious hours. Her voice, a fragile thread against the coming roar, pleaded, "We must flee. Now, to the high ground, to the solace of stone, to the saving grace of water." But her words were lost to a will far greater than her own. The creature turned, and in its gaze she found a depth she had never before witnessed. It was not fear, nor was it anger, but a resolve as ancient and unyielding as the mountains themselves. Its hands became a blur of taps and signs, a silent language too swift for her to decipher. As if summoned by this unheard call, the child materialized, its eyes wide with a terror that mirrored the burning sky. The parent spoke then, not in signs, but in soft, urgent vocalizations, a true and tender language. Then, in a single, fluid motion, it lifted its young one and placed the small, trembling body into Sarah's embrace. The child was a surprising weight in her arms, a dense core of muscle beneath a coat of downy fur, and it clung to her with a desperate strength that promised to leave its mark upon her skin. She stumbled, a gasp catching in her throat, before finding her footing. Her gaze, filled with a dawning bewilderment, rose to meet the parent's. A single definitive tap, yes. A finger pointed first to her, then to the child, and finally, a gesture toward the north, a silent plea away from the encroaching flames. Asterisk, keep this one safe, be its shield. Asterisk. Wait, she breathed. The word, a fragile protest. No, you cannot mean this. You must come with us. But it was already in motion, its powerful form turning not away from the danger, but toward its south, into the very heart of the inferno, toward the logging camp. And a cold, sickening certainty bloomed in Sarah's heart, for she knew its impossible, noble destination. The loggers, the very men who had lit this pyre. Perhaps they were still down there, ignorant of the monster they had unleashed. or perhaps already ensnared by their own fiery trap. And this creature, this magnificent being who had every right to let them perish in the flames of their own making, was going to try and save their souls. Don't! Her voice tore through the smoky air. A desperate cry. Please. They are not worthy of your grace. They will only destroy you if they see you. It paused to look back one last time. And in its eyes, she saw a universe of sorrow, a quiet acceptance of fate, and something that shone with the impossible light of forgiveness. Then it ran, its powerful strides devouring the ground, carrying it toward the smoke, the flame, and a death that seemed all but certain. For that is the burden and the glory of the truly good. They offer salvation even to those who are unworthy of being saved. Sarah remained rooted to the earth, the small child a trembling weight against her, and felt something shatter within her own heart. It was not the sharp sting of pain, but rather the final, brittle shell of her cynicism giving way, revealing the pure, unvarnished truth that lay beneath. Kindness was not a myth. It was real, a living, breathing force, the kind that bleeds for others, the kind that gives without ever counting the cost. She had not lost it. She had simply forgotten the shape of its face. Leaning in, she pressed her face into the child's soft fur, her whisper a reverent breath against its ear. Your parent is the most noble soul this world has ever shown me. Then, with a newfound resolve, she turned and ran north, bearing another's child toward the promise of safety, a silent prayer echoing in her heart for the parent's miraculous return. For miles, the fire was a relentless predator at their heels. Sarah could feel its hot breath pressing through the trees, the smoke turning every gasp for air into a searing pain. The child's whimpers were a constant, sorrowful song against her chest. Her ankle cried out in agony. Her ribs felt as if they were splintering with every stride, but she did not falter. She could not. This small, innocent life had been placed in her care. A sacred trust she would sooner die than betray. They found a creek. Just as Sarah's strength finally abandoned her, she collapsed into the cool, rushing water, her breath coming in ragged sobs as she gently lowered the child. It drank deeply, splashed water on its face, and then turned its gaze back toward the burning world from which they had fled, its eyes a reflection of pure, undiluted fear, waiting, longing, needing the one who was not there. And Sarah, in her exhaustion, had no solace to give. She could not know if the great creature still drew breath, or if its heart had been stilled. She could not know if it had reached the loggers, if they had been met with salvation or violence, life or death. She knew nothing, save for the terrible certainty that the forest was being consumed, that the world was a vessel of cruelty, and that goodness was extinguished with the rising of every merciless Sunday. They remained in the sanctuary of the creek until darkness fell, moving ever upstream as the fire's embrace drew near. The child's cries eventually softened into silence, its body now just a quiet, clinging weight, an absolute trust placed in her to navigate a world it was too young to comprehend. She had forgotten this feeling, the profound weight and honor of being responsible for a life more fragile than her own, of being the solitary guardian standing between a child and the encroaching dark. Emma had been only 6 years old when Tom's hand first found Sarah's face. Old enough to witness the act, yet far too young to grasp its poison. And in that moment, Sarah had made her own choices. The choice to remain, the choice to conceal the bruises, the choice to shield her husband's darkness instead of her daughter's light. And so Emma had grown in the shadow of that choice, learning to watch her own mother endure cruelty as if it were merely the turning of the seasons, inevitable, something to be survived. It was no mystery, then, why the silence had grown between them. But that Sarah was a ghost. This woman, forged in the crucible of the wilderness and refined by necessity, was someone else entirely. The woman who had stayed with Tom had perished somewhere in the deep woods. The woman who now carried this child through a baptism of fire was reborn. She was someone who finally understood the sacred truth, that to protect those you love is not merely to endure the wounds inflicted upon them. It is to build a world for them where they never learn to call the pain of a wound normal. As the midnight hour tolled, the child finally surrendered to slumber, its small body, spent and weary, clinging to the sanctuary of Sarah's warmth. She found a haven in a hollow carved beneath a cliff's brow, where she settled them both into the earth's embrace. Her hand traced the soft patterns of its fur, a tender, familiar motion that echoed a lifetime of stroking Emma's hair, as a lullaby from 30 years past rose unbidden to her lips. In that sacred quiet, she felt the exquisite agony of a heart breaking and healing in the very same breath. If the great protector did not return from the flames, she would become the guardian this small life deserved, weaving for it a cloak of invisibility and teaching it the sacred art of safety. This was the debt she owed, a promise whispered to the ashes. A debt that was not merely a fraction of her soul, but its entirety. As slumber claimed her, she sent desperate prayers into the void, offerings to deities whose names she had long forgotten, a silent, fervent plea echoing in the chambers of her heart. Asterisk, please. Oh, please, let it return. Asterisk. The dawn broke not in gold, but in a mournful gray, a shroud of ash blanketing the world. The forest was a portrait of ruin, skeletal trees clawing at the sky, the very air a suffocating perfume of devastation. Sarah was stirred from this grim tableau by the gentle pat of a small hand on her cheek, a tiny finger pointing toward the southern horizon. A solitary figure was traversing the desolate, charred tapestry of the land. A wild hope leaped within Sarah's chest, a sudden, startling beat. She rose, a hand cupped above her brow, her gaze straining to pierce the veil of smoke and haze. The silhouette was immense, its form a mosaic of what might have been fur or the deepest soot, and it moved with the pained, careful deliberation of a being in profound agony. And yet, against all odds, it moved. A sound of pure, unadulterated joy escaped the child's lips as it scrambled from the rocks, a blur of motion too swift for Sarah to halt. It sprinted toward the approaching form, and the great being, for it was truly him, a phoenix risen from the pyre, sank to its knees, catching the small one in an embrace that trembled with exhaustion, wounds, and a boundless love. Sarah descended with a reverent slowness, granting them the sanctity of their reunion. As she drew near, the true cost of survival was laid bare. Vicious burns, one hand a canvas of raw blisters, its fur scorched away in sorrowful patches. It was a vision of torment, yet the manner in which it held its child, a trinity of fierceness, gratitude, and exquisite gentleness, brought a sting to Sarah's eyes that was far sharper than any smoke. "You saved them," she breathed, the words a soft current in the ruined air. "The loggers, you brought them out from the inferno." Its ancient eyes met hers, and it gave a slow, deliberate nod, a sound rumbling from its chest like a complex chord of sorrow and acceptance. Then, with a scorched hand, it touched her shoulder, a gesture now imbued with a new, solemn gravity, a silent thank you for her vigil, for her compassion, for her steadfast presence. Sarah's own hand rose to meet its shoulder in a mirrored gesture. "We are a family now," she declared, her voice certain. "This is the sacred duty of family." And so they remained, a silent trinity amidst the smoldering embers of the forest, three souls impossibly intertwined, bound by a force for which the human tongue has no word. It was the kind of unbreakable covenant forged in the crucible of shared survival, the sacred pact made when you choose another's well-being against the deafening chorus of reason. Over the course of the next 2 days, the great fire consumed itself, its fury finally spent, rendering the entire edifice of human ambition unto ruin. Sarah felt not a flicker of remorse. Some foundations are built on such rot, they can only be cleansed by flame. The men, miraculously, had been spared. Miller would recount the tale to her later of a colossal being emerging from the smoke to hurl him and two comrades from the path of a collapsing tree before vanishing. Other crews whispered similar legends, of shadows that danced with human form, of phantom hands that pulled them from the jaws of death. The official reports would speak of incredible luck, but the whispers that traveled on the wind spoke a different truth. The forest had risen to protect its own. And in the face of such a primal power, who would dare to argue? The logging company crumbled in the aftermath, its foundations as weak as the ash that remained, igniting a legal firestorm. The forest, in its scarred majesty, was consecrated as a protected habitat, and that inertia, that slow turning of gears, meant sanctuary. At least for a time. Sarah stood at the threshold of the burn, her thoughts drifting to the great cycles of existence, how sometimes the only path to a true beginning is to let the world you knew burn to the ground. This was a truth she now felt in the very marrow of her bones. Her newfound kin had retreated to a sanctuary, more remote, a fortress more difficult to assail, and extended an invitation for her to join their exodus. It was a foregone conclusion, for a family does not abandon its own. Yet, before she could embrace that future, there was a ghost from her past she was compelled to face. For 2 days she journeyed down the mountain, a solitary pilgrim guided by smoke-stained trails and memory. Her body, once a vessel of quiet resignation, now moved with purpose. The wilderness had not broken her, it had forged her anew, tempering her into an instrument of survival. It was a Wednesday afternoon when she stepped back into the world of men, a gift of clean clothes, materializing as if by magic. In the humble sanctuary of the community center, she washed away 2 weeks of fire and wilderness, and when she stood before the mirror, she did not recognize the stranger who gazed back. Her hair was a cascade of silver, her face a map etched by wind and worry, her eyes holding the deep knowledge of things unseen. This was Sarah Mitchell at 63 years of age, and she wore the visage of a woman who had passed through the gates of her own demise and returned with a fiercer spirit and an unshakable certainty. She borrowed a telephone, her fingers dialing a sequence of digits that had been etched into her memory for 3 long decades. On the third ring, a voice answered, a single word suspended in the ether. Hello? It was Emma. A knot formed in Sarah's throat. It had been 4 years since she had heard that melody, both familiar and foreign. It was a voice shaded with age, weathered by time, but it was unmistakably her daughter's. Emma, she finally managed to whisper, the words fragile yet momentous. It's Mom. A chasm of silence stretched across the line before a fractured whisper returned. Mom? Oh my God. Where are you? Everyone said you were gone. Your truck was in the river. They found it 2 months ago. I'm alive, Sarah said, her voice a steady anchor. I am more than all right. And there is something I must tell you. And so she spoke, not of every secret, but of enough, of leaving Tom, of survival, of the profound revelation that she was worthy of more than she had accepted. She spoke of the deep, aching sorrow for all the years her daughter had borne witness to a mother who slowly withered, who built a fortress of excuses. I should have found my courage the day you asked me to leave, Sarah confessed, the words heavy with the weight of years. I should have been brave enough to choose you over fear. I am so sorry, my sweet girl. I am so profoundly sorry. The sound of Emma's weeping flowed through the line, a torrent of grief and relief. I believed you were gone, she choked out, the words catching in her throat. I thought I had lost you forever. I was terrified, Mom, that you left this world believing my heart held anything but love for you. Your love was a truth I never doubted, Sarah replied, her voice a calm shore against her daughter's turbulent waves. The real question was never about your heart, but about my own strength. Whether I loved myself enough to walk away. And back then I didn't, but now I do. For the space of an hour, the years between them dissolved as Emma painted a picture of her life, a marriage, a daughter named Claire, a home nestled in Portland. Her words were an open invitation, a plea to come visit, to witness firsthand the woman on the other end of the line, whose voice resonated not with exhaustion, but with a newfound fire. I will come, Sarah promised, a vow whispered across the miles. Just as soon as I've settled the ghost of my past. But you must know, Emma, the woman you remember, she no longer exists. The person who will stand before you now has been forged in hardship. She is less yielding, more formidable, and she no longer bows to anyone's will. A laugh, shimmering with unshed tears, escaped Emma's lips. Good, she breathed into the phone, because that woman sounds like someone I have been waiting my whole life to meet. Their call ended on a melody of promises and future plans, leaving Sarah standing with the borrowed receiver in her hand, feeling a weight lift from her soul that had burdened her for decades. It was a revelation. A quiet dawn breaking within her. A new beginning was possible. Even at 63 years of age. Even after a lifetime of shadows, you could always choose a different path and be reborn. The very next sun saw her severing the legal ties that bound her to a painful past. Tom offered no resistance, a quiet admission of his own relief, perhaps already seeking a new soul to bruise. And for Sarah, there was no echo of sorrow, only the profound peace of knowing his storms would never again make landfall on her shores. For 3 fleeting weeks, she lingered in the world of men, putting the scattered pieces of her old life in order. She saw Emma and held her granddaughter. A tiny miracle was Sarah's gaze and Emma's joyful laugh. Cradling that child, her mind drifted to the other small being she'd carried from the flames, and she pondered if love itself changed its form across the boundaries of species, or if its essence remained unaltered. A sacred bond, an unspoken trust, and the primal, unyielding instinct to shield the vulnerable. When the time came to announce her return to the wild embrace of the mountains, Emma met her words not with questions or protests, but with a deep, knowing silence. She simply held her mother close and whispered, "Be safe. Return to us when your heart tells you to. And Mom, thank you for finally choosing your own life." On a crystalline October morning, Sarah ascended back into the heart of the Cascades. The forest, too, was in a state of grace and healing, with vibrant green shoots defiantly piercing the gray veil of ash. It was the eternal rhythm of nature to persist, to adapt, to fiercely refuse the finality of death. She moved along pathways invisible to any other eye, guided by carefully placed stones, fractured branches, and an ancient wisdom that now resided deep within her very bones. Her wild family was waiting in the sacred space they always kept. It was the young one who spotted her first, its legs, now stronger and more certain, carrying it in a joyful rush. It collided with her in an embrace so forceful it staggered her, its voice a cascade of chittering notes that could have been laughter or pure elation, or the simple, profound song of reunion. The elder creature stood sentinel at the edge of the clearing, a quiet monument of resilience. The scars from the fire had softened, with new fur sprouting in hopeful patches across its form. It emanated an aura of restored vitality, and as their gazes met, Sarah saw a deep, unspoken acknowledgement in its eyes, a message that transcended words. You chose to come back to us. You were free, yet you returned. A gentle smile graced Sarah's lips as she lifted her stone, tapping it 3 times against another, a percussive whisper that spoke a single, sacred word. I'm home. And from the clearing, the elder creature answered in kind, its own 3 taps echoing through the quiet air. Welcome home. In the months that followed, they wove the threads of a new existence together. It was not the life Sarah had once envisioned, a life confined by 4 walls, a mortgage, and a husband whose hands were instruments of slow destruction. This was a different tapestry altogether, smaller in scale, more demanding in its challenges, and infinitely, breathtakingly better. She began to learn the soul of the forest as they did, to read the future of the weather in the bough of a branch, to distinguish the mushrooms that gave life from those that dealt death. She learned the art of silent passage through the dense undergrowth, the wisdom of seeking shelter before the storm, and the symphony of the wilderness spoken in hushed sounds and fleeting signs. From the elder, she received the gift of gentle construction, learning to build shelters that rested lightly upon the earth and vanished without a scar. From the young one, she relearned the forgotten language of joy, a pure, unburdened delight in the world's small wonders, a stone that captured the sunlight, the intricate lace of ice on a still puddle, the hushed magic of the first snowfall. And Sarah, in turn, offered her own wisdom. She shared the healing power of herbs, echoes from her nursing past that could soothe an infection. She demonstrated the alchemy of preserving food against the lean times, the secret to coaxing flame into being more quickly, and the magic of speaking across valleys with mirrors and sunlight. Their exchange was a sacred barter of knowledge, each giving from their own abundance, each receiving what they lacked. That year, winter descended with a merciless fury, plunging the world below zero and burying it under 6 feet of snow. A cold fear had gripped Sarah's heart, a whisper that this season would be their end. But her companions were born of this harshness. They knew the winter's secrets. They led her to hidden caves and earthen shelters that held the memory of warmth, shared their own stores when hers dwindled, and on the most brutal nights, when the cold was a tangible predator, their bodies became her shield. In the heart of that immense, frozen wilderness, she had never felt less alone. The arrival of spring felt like a long-held breath finally being released. The snow receded, unveiling the stark, beautiful bones of the forest floor, and from the cold earth, new life pushed forth in a riot of green. The world awakened from its slumber, and with it came a profound realization for Sarah. She had weathered a complete turning of the seasons, a year lived in the wild, a year dedicated to her own soul. That summer brought a visit from Emma, who journeyed up the mountain trails with little Claire, now a curious and fearless 2-year-old, in tow. Sarah met them at a designated place, a threshold between her 2 worlds, for some truths are so sacred they must be kept shrouded in silence. You look well, Mom, Emma observed, her gaze searching and tender. No, more than well, you look happy. And she was. That was the astonishing truth. She had walked through the fire of violence, the wilderness of addiction, the chaos of a car wreck, and the inferno of a burning forest. She had been stripped of everything she thought she was, only to build a more authentic life from the cinders. She had discovered a family in a place no map could ever lead to. I am, she affirmed, the words, feeling solid and real on her tongue. For the first time in a lifetime, perhaps, I am truly happy. Their day was a tapestry woven from shared moments. Sarah became a guide, teaching Claire the secrets of the woods, which plants offered sustenance, how to decipher the language of the birds, the art of moving with a whisper. As she watched, Emma's eyes fill with pride, observing her own daughter. Sarah understood the true meaning of legacy. It wasn't in houses or vows or possessions, but in this sacred, unbroken chain, the passing of wisdom, the sharing of joy, the quiet grace of unconditional love. As the sun began to dip, and Emma and Claire prepared to leave, Emma held her in a fierce, lingering embrace. You know the door is always open, don't you? You don't have to be alone in this vastness. A serene smile touched Sarah's lips. But I'm not alone, she answered softly, not for a single moment. Emma offered no questions, no prying into the mystery of her mother's words. She simply nodded, a gesture of pure acceptance. And in that moment, Sarah was reminded that trust, in its purest form, was a miracle all its own. The years that followed flowed one into the next, a river of serene moments. Time was no longer measured by the rigid lines of a calendar, but by the turning of the seasons, the steady growth of the young one, and the collection of memories that shone like polished stones in her heart. The memory of the first gift from the child, a clumsily woven basket of vines, perfect in its imperfection. The memory of the elder teaching her to catch fish with her bare hands, both of them standing waist deep in the icy stream, their laughter echoing through the canyon. The memory of the three of them, a silent family huddled around a crackling fire as snow blanketed their world, cocooned in warmth, in safety, in togetherness. The seasons turned, and with them, Sarah's years bloomed from 65 to 67, and then to a quiet 70. Time etched its story upon her body, her knees complaining of the miles, her hair a silver crown, but her spirit remained untamed, a resilient fire. She could still master a 10-mile hike, still coax a flame to life in the heart of a storm, and still stand as a fierce guardian for the sacred beings she loved, shielding them from a world that would shatter their peace if it ever truly knew they were there. Miller passed into memory when Sarah was 71, his heart giving out in a single, final beat. Emma's voice carried the news to her on a visit, a sorrowful echo from town. Sarah went to the funeral, a ghost in the back of the crowd, listening as they spoke of a good man who had loved the soul of the forest. When it was over, she walked the old path to where the logging camp had once stood, only to find the wilderness had woven it back into itself. Young cedar saplings rose defiantly through the skeletons of rusted machinery, nature patiently reclaiming what was always hers. She placed a single smooth stone upon the earth there, a quiet monument. She tapped it 3 times. Asterisk. Thank you for seeing what others could not. For believing. For being afraid enough to truly care. Asterisk. The forest offered no voice in reply, but in the sigh of the wind through the pines, in that particular focused silence that follows a heartfelt plea, she felt a shift, a sense of being heard, and that was more than enough. Through the years, other seekers came, drawn by whispers of Bigfoot, chasing proof or dismissal of what the loggers had witnessed. They always left with empty hands. The forest children were too wise, too woven into the shadows, and Sarah had become a master of gentle deceit. She would wander down, a curious local with a friendly smile, and send them on grand adventures toward canyons she knew held nothing but echoes. She was protecting what needed to be protected. One researcher, however, came perilously close, a woman near Sarah's own age, with eyes that missed nothing and a will forged over decades. Her name was Rachel Scott. For 40 years, she had studied the lives of primates, and the stories from these mountains had taken root in her soul, refusing to be ignored. They sat over coffee in town, 2 wise women dancing around a truth too vast to name. "You've seen it," Rachel finally said, her voice soft. It was not a question, but a statement of quiet reverence. Sarah considered the easy comfort of a lie, but the moment was too honest for that. "Yes," she answered, the single word holding the weight of a lifetime. "And you have no intention of telling me where?" "No," Sarah affirmed, her voice gentle but as unyielding as ancient stone. Rachel nodded, a slow, understanding gesture. She was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "Good. Some things should be allowed to remain a mystery. I have spent my entire career watching us dismantle and destroy the very wonders we discover. I am so tired of being a part of that." She departed the town with the morning light, but left a note for Sarah before she went. "Thank you for keeping the mystery alive. The world is in desperate need of more unknowns." Sarah carried that small piece of paper in her pocket for months, a folded talisman against a world of doubt. It was a reminder that some souls understood, that not everyone's first instinct was to capture, to cage, to prove. Some people were content to simply know a wonder existed and to let it be. The child grew. Of all the changes the forest brought, this was the most profound ache. To watch the transformation from a gangly infant to an adolescent, and then to something on the cusp of its own vast life, its voice found a new, deeper resonance. Its movements lost their playful abandon, becoming measured and deliberate. It began to wander farther, vanishing for days at a time, testing the edges of its independence, just as all children must. The elder one watched this unfolding, with a gaze that held the same bittersweet symphony of pride and sorrow. Sarah remembered so vividly from raising Emma. You pour your entire being into raising them to leave. But dear God, You pray, they will choose to stay. The young one returned one spring, and not alone. It brought a companion, another of its kind, younger, more timid, with a coat of rich, reddish fur. They communicated in a flurry of taps, a shy, excited, and awkward introduction. The great elder studied them both, its deep eyes then turning to meet Sarah's. In that shared glance, a universe of understanding passed between them. The child was beginning its own story, weaving its own family. This was the sacred, unbreakable rhythm of life. Sarah's thoughts drifted to Claire, Emma's daughter, now a woman with a husband and a life of her own. She thought of the great turning wheel of life, of cycles and continuity. She thought of how the deepest act of love is often the courage to open your hands and let go, even when every fiber of your being screams to hold on tighter. After a week had passed, the young pair left. They moved toward the deeper heart of the mountains, seeking a territory to call their own. The elder one watched them go, its ancient eyes a perfect mirror to the storm of emotions in Sarah's own heart. Pride, loss, hope, and a measure of fear. They sat together in the quiet of that evening, two aging souls who had endured more than the world should ever ask. The fire cast long, dancing shadows. The forest breathed a slow, steady rhythm around them. And in that moment, Sarah understood with breathtaking clarity. She had lived an entire second life out here. She had found a family born of silence and trust, a purpose deeper than words, a meaning that had redeemed her very soul. She had become someone she could finally be proud of. She was 76 years old. And her body, a faithful vessel for so long, was beginning its final, slow return to the earth. The arthritis was afire in her joints. Her heart had begun to play strange, syncopated rhythms that would have deeply concerned the nurse she used to be. She knew her time was not long, perhaps a year, perhaps not even that. The great creature knew it too. She could see it in the profound tenderness of its gaze, in its careful, constant concern. It stayed closer now, matching its powerful strides to her slower pace. It brought her the softest roots and berries when chewing became a trial. "Thank you," she whispered into the twilight one evening, her voice a fragile thread in the vast tapestry of the forest. "For everything. For saving me. For showing me a better way to be." It reached out, its immense hand gently touching her shoulder, and tapped 3 times the first language they had ever shared, a silent poem that said, "Asterisk, I am grateful. I see you. All is well. Asterisk." "We're okay," Sarah whispered back, her agreement a peaceful sigh. Winter swept down from the peaks early that year. The first snow arrived in October, a heavy, unyielding blanket of white. Sarah's body fought a losing battle with the cold. The great creature built the fire into a roaring beacon, brought her extra furs, and laid its own warm body near hers, but there is a kind of cold that seeks out old bones, a chill that no fire can truly vanquish, and it settled deep within her. On a night when the wind howled like a mournful beast through the high passes and the fire seemed to shrink against the encroaching dark, Sarah closed her eyes in sleep and simply did not open them again. She slipped away on a quiet tide. There was no pain, no fear. There was only a profound weariness, finally, and a readiness for rest. The great creature found her in the pale light of morning. It sat with her still form for a long, silent time, uttering a low, resonant sound that was the very shape of sorrow. Then, with a solemn grace, it did what must be done. It wrapped her in the softest furs they possessed. It carried her in its powerful arms to a high, sacred place in the mountains, a ledge that was the first to be kissed by the rising Sunday. It laid her gently upon a bed of stone, polished smooth by the patient hands of wind and time. Beside her, it placed the small carved figure, the woman by the fire, the watcher in the trees. It was the very first gift. Then, it pressed its hand to the cold stone and tapped 3 times. Asterisk. "Thank you. I see you. We're okay." For a moment, the entire forest seemed to hold its breath. Then the snow began to fall once more, soft and reverent flakes. By morning, Sarah's body would be shrouded in white, returned to the mountain, becoming one with the eternal story of life and loss and life again. But the great creature did not leave. It remained through the fading light of day, through the deep dark of night, and through the heart of the storm. A silent guardian, keeping watch. A final, sacred goodbye, a testament to a bond that had transcended worlds and defied all definition. This was family, forged not of blood but of belonging, in all the profound ways that would ever truly matter. 3 months would pass before the wilderness whispered its secret to Emma. A hiker, following a sun-dappled creek, discovered the last tokens of her mother's civilized life, a wedding ring and a medical bracelet which were delivered to the ranger station. The call that followed was a gentle devastation, speaking of evidence found but of a body reclaimed, suggesting the work of wild animals, and whispering the ancient truth that the forest sometimes keeps its own. And yet, Emma drove toward the mountains. She hiked into their heart with Claire, who was now a mother herself, carrying a baby girl named Sarah. 3 generations were ascending into the wild, a pilgrimage to honor the woman who had chosen it as her final home. They did not find her, but they found her place a knowing that bloomed in Emma's soul, a compass guided by instinct alone. The stone platform, the breathtaking vista, the palpable sense of peace that hung in the air like a benediction. There, she laid down an offering of wildflowers, the very kind her mother had so dearly loved. She was happy here, Emma whispered to Claire, her voice a soft current on the mountain breeze. That is all that matters. She finally found the place where she belonged. As they prepared for their descent, little Sarah's hand pointed toward the immense canopy of trees. Big, she uttered, the very first word to grace her lips. Big. Emma turned, her eyes met only by a cathedral of shadow and light filtering through the branches. But she felt it, a presence as real as the ground beneath her feet, something ancient and watchful. And in its gaze, she found not fear, but a profound and humbling gratitude. Thank you, she said aloud, her words a prayer to the forest, to the unseen guardian, to whatever sacred power had kept her mother safe. Thank you for giving her a family. And in that instant, the watching ceased. A faint rustle in the undergrowth, a sound of gentle retreat, and then there was nothing but the ageless sigh of the wind, the wisdom of the trees, and the eternal patience of the mountains. Emma hiked back down with her daughter and granddaughter, returning to her world to live her life. But she became the keeper of a story, one she told carefully, selectively, a tale of a woman who had survived the ravages of violence and addiction, who had fled into the wilderness only to find a salvation she'd never known, and who had lived her final years fierce, free, and utterly unafraid. She never spoke of the creatures, for some secrets are too sacred for words. But she told enough for the world to understand. Sarah Mitchell had chosen herself. She had chosen the wildness over safety, the stark truth over gentle comfort, and a profound connection over mere convenience. And in that singular, courageous choice, she had blossomed into something more magnificent than she had ever been before. The forest holds its secrets close, even now. Sometimes, those who wander its paths report fleeting visions of shadows that move with an unnatural grace, of eyes that catch the light in ways they shouldn't, of sounds that are almost voices, almost language, almost human. But no proof ever survives the journey home. No evidence ever holds. Because the forest protects its own. Because some beings know the ancient art of remaining unseen. Because the world still has sacred places where mystery lives and breathes and watches from the shadows. And on the quietest nights, when the wind whispers just so through the pines, you can hear a sound. Tap, tap, tap. A rhythm like a heartbeat. A cadence like a conversation. The unique language two beings created when words were no longer enough. The message is beautifully simple. The message is everything. I see you. My heart offers its thanks. We are okay. And from the deep wilderness, from those hallowed lands where humans rarely tread and legends walk on 2 legs through ancient forests, the message always returns. It always comes back. We are okay. We remember. Love is not a thing that ends simply because a body does. It echoes. It persists. It survives. Just as Sarah Mitchell did. Just as all of us do when we finally find the unwavering courage to become who we were always meant to be. The forest knows. The forest remembers. And that, in the end, is a legacy more than enough.